Well, I thought we'd begin by all of you maybe defining what Kundalini is, maybe succinctly just to give everybody an idea. It might be the same, it might be different. Let's see. Bonnie, why don't you start? Yeah.
I see Kundalini as the life force, and most of my original research was in the way that the Indian Vedanta looks at Kundalini, which is that it comes in, it ignites in the body, in the fetus, causes the fetus to grow into a child, and basically energizes the body, and the residual energy after the child is born is curled at the base of the spine, holding your energy field in stasis until you die. And that many of the yogic practices and many other modern practices like energy work, shamanic work, many other activities can cause this energy to awaken and start to uncoil in the body, and it activates a much more intense energy process and brings about transformation. So that's how I've been looking at it over the years of working with people who have these energetic awakenings.
Lovely. Thank you, Vera.
I have a sense of also being able to look at the Kundalini awakening as a process, as part of the sort of psycho-spiritual maturation and emergence process that isn't event-oriented necessarily, of like, well, there's this way in which we get to speak about it now in our culture as these events that happen, Kundalini rising, right? There's this like glorification, idealization of the experience of it, but I've always seen it as a process rather than as an event. And so for me, it is part of the psycho-spiritual process of maturation and sort of spiritual ripening.
So I would agree with everything that both of you had said, and when being asked this question, one of the things that comes to mind is when either clients or people who are having problems with Kundalini or with energy that, you know, they're not sure, is this Kundalini or, you know, what is happening? One of the things that I ask them about is, well, what do you know about prana or chi? And often, you know, there's a greater sense of what that is. And so I would say that to a degree they're exactly one and the same thing. It's just that with most people, 99.9% of that energy is in potentia at the lower end of the spine for most people. And so to some degree or other, there's been an opening of that energy. And so when I am talking with clients who really need to have a sense of agency, you know, of some amount of more control over the situation, or at least the illusion of control, I found that it's useful to talk about pranatana. And so pranatana is a Sanskrit term basically meaning heightened prana. And the difference between Kundalini and pranatana, once again at the base, it's all one and the same. But for some people, they have risings that are of a more either gentle nature, or they don't tend to catalyze a lifelong or years-long Kundalini process. And so they often mirror each other, pranatana and Kundalini. And so we can talk about this more at length. But often when they hear that it's not necessarily a Kundalini awakening, but something where they may have more time to integrate what's already happened, and then also to acquire skills to work with something if there's a larger rising at a later time. You know, there's something really potent and powerful about having a sense of differentiation of potential outcome. And so, I mean, there's so much to be said. Lillian Silburn, a French researcher of Kashmir Shaivism, talked about that this entire room, there are different Sanskrit labels for Kundalini, but this entire expanse is Kundalini in a certain sense of the definition, right? But this gets seriously confusing based on what we've said so far.
My sense of it, or what I've learned from teachers who I've worked with, is Kundalini is dormant, primordial energy that is stored, or we could say in the sacrum, but in the subtle body. And at some point it may arise and move through the central channel, and that would be what we would term Kundalini. It is life force, it is energy, it is Shakti, but it's primordial energy, and it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. And it can emerge spontaneously, as many people might have experienced, and it can be a very frightening experience because of its power, or it can emerge with grace, and somebody can have a very gentle process with it, even though it is a very, very intense energy, depending how, I would say, how fit our body as a vehicle to hold that energy is. And so a question I have for people when they come to me for trauma, because sometimes Kundalini emerges spontaneously or because they've been trying to have it emerge, and along with this incredible energy comes that trauma, because it unblocks the blockages in our body and the tensions, the belief systems that we may or may not be aware of, and it causes a lot of problems. We're not quite ready to be able to, or another way of saying it, we don't quite have the capacity to be with everything that it can bring up. So I often ask people, well, what is your motivation, one, for wanting Kundalini to emerge or arise? And if it's that you want something from it, you may get a little bit into trouble. It can burn you. So why not practice meditation, pranayamas, the tools that we have to create, and also work on your trauma, so we create the body as a vehicle to be ready for this energy to come. So that wasn't quite a question, but I'll ask you all to remark on what I said. Bonnie, go ahead.
Well, I found that not only does Kundalini, when it activates, brings up any unfinished business in your psyche. So if there's trauma in your history, it can be more difficult to process the Kundalini awakening than if there hasn't been much trauma.
Right.
But I've also found that sometimes a trauma is the initiator for Kundalini. Okay. So you might have activated it through an NDE, through an automobile accident. I've met people who've fallen off of a horse, hit their tailbone, activated the energy, or people who have been in a violent situation. One man I worked with had been beaten up by a team of young people, and the Kundalini activated 2 days later as he was walking down a hallway and nearly knocked him out. So if you think of it as, I think of Kundalini as creating a clearing process as well as a transformative process, and that basically we are energy fields. If you think of your body as being a grid of energy, when this process activates, it's heightening all of the energy in your field. And so if there's stored up emotional stuck places, or if you've had physical injury that's trying to heal, it can amplify whatever is going on in your body, as well as bring up new phenomena like psychic phenomena or anxiety, fears, feelings that don't even feel personal, like almost like you've tuned into the world. So there's many different kinds of phenomena that arise in this process, but fortunately everything doesn't arise for everybody. So often it's kind of, we each have our own unique way that this process unfolds in our bodies. Mm-hmm. That's been my observation over working with people for about 30 years.
Yeah, I think that's right, yeah. Would either of you like to comment? Yeah.
Only in the sense that it's interesting that we would want to have it arise, to do something for it, that there's this kind of coveting of the sensational experience of it. And I think that there's this kind of a natural wisdom with which it emerges and it arises, and it does to each one of us individually what it needs to do. And it might be too much, and we might be burned up. And in those cases, it is wonderful to have guidance and support and mentorship and wonderful therapists and trauma work, and that is not an abomination. and if that happens to be one of the ways in which it emerges, that in whichever way it emerges, there is nevertheless a wisdom to it and a process to it that has its own knowing, has its own timing, especially when it's not like, oh, I'm gonna get my Kundalini to rise now, what do I have to do, right? Like when it's this kind of, when it's life doing us. And as life does us, right, like reality itself is the tantric consort in a way. And as life does us, it like grows our tolerance for more and more of life, for more and more of our, of the range of our human experiences.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ted.
Yeah, that was beautifully put in terms of all of life becoming the consort. And that's what I meant earlier about this entire room, you know, being an aspect of Kundalini, that the process unfolds non-duality, right? But for many people who have the beginnings of risings, they don't get that sense whatsoever. And often there's trauma in how it rises for some people. And one of the key components that tends to bring great relief is when people have that first experience that they are the energy. So at first, a lot of the trauma can come. So by this, I mean a trauma of a difficult arising comes from this sense that something's happening to the person, right? Rather than them becoming the person that they are, you know, that they've been all along underneath various traumas of life.
I think it is an energy that is transformative, like has been said. But I think it's when we grasp at it and try and become attached to some of the psychic phenomena, or the many psychic phenomena that can occur when it does emerge, that we can get a little bit into trouble. I know many, many years ago, when I was going through many years of Kundalini, incredible psychic phenomena were occurring. I wasn't so interested in that, even though it was fascinating, and it certainly crumbled many or all belief systems I had about the world because I was quite young. I was really interested in the ground in which it was all arising in. Like, where is this coming from? How is this happening? Who am I in relation to this? And that lack of attachment opened a space, I think, for a clearer and more, I was going to say gentle, I don't know if it was gentle, but a clearer arising that could be held. I think we got into a little bit of trouble when we grasp onto some of the psychic phenomena, and then we can prevent its full expression. Your thoughts?
I agree. I also want to add, though, that many people who activate Kundalini, it's because of their spiritual practice, and it's coming in response to a very deep longing to know God, to know truth, or to know who am I. And it's very shocking because very often when you're in a sincere Zen practice or yoga community or Buddhist community, and these energies start to arise during meditation, it isn't understood or supported by the community you're in. And so this is the most common type of longing in my observation that brings about the awakening of the energy, rather than just wanting energy. Most people don't have any understanding at all of Kundalini when this energy starts to rise. They haven't been looking for it, and they're quite shocked. I've even had Catholic nuns call me and say, they thought that they had really handled their sexual energy, and all of a sudden all this energy is coming up in them. And they have no context for it at all. So the most important piece, I think, that we can offer is to help people have a context that spiritual awakening incorporates energetic changes. And it's lacking. The two in most systems have been separated. I was raised Catholic. It was many years before I recognized there was any energetic component to spirituality.
And I think this is why we wanted to have this conversation, because more and more people are talking about this phenomena of Kundalini and not really being clear what it is or why it is and how it can happen. And should we facilitate it? Should we not? Should we try and make it happen? Do we allow it to come with grace? And so we're here to try and give some context, as you said, Bonnie, and maybe some answers, although it's a great mystery. There's so much to it. It's a vast, vast topic. One of the things I did want to speak about is its relationship to trauma, because I know when it comes either spontaneously or through meditation practice, which I think then it can come through grace, or by forced practices, and it begins to dislodge these frozen parts of ourselves in the psyche that are traumatized. What do we do? Because it can be really overwhelming. Not only are we having this upsurge of this primordial energy, which can feel furious at times, but here are our own dysregulated emotions coming back in, and parts of ourselves that are terrified coming back in, and it's incredibly overwhelming. And I love what you said, Vera, about trusting it and being great, and you know, trusting it, it's unfolding. And some people, you know, can really get into a psychosis or a really awful experience with it. So maybe we can speak a little bit about how we can work with that.
Great.
So maybe one of the things to start out before coming around to what you're asking about is that there are many, many more traditional spiritual teachers and you know, New Age teachers who have some level of awareness of how to arouse, you know, or provoke Kundalini, but the percentage who know how to work with it once it's arisen, especially strongly, is smaller than you might think. So at the Spiritual Emergence Network, about out of all the transpersonal phenomena that drives people to want to get help either from spiritually trained psychologists and psychiatrists, Kundalini is at the top of the list, you know, various transpersonal sorts of events, meaning like someone has a void experience, right, and this destabilizes them, or they begin having psychic dreams and they were materialists before this point, right, and so this causes a lot of problems. But Kundalini, it's about 25% of the people who call us where this is the problem, and a large number of those people were in, you know, a traditional system, but like you were saying, whether it's the Sangha, the Lama, the teacher, they don't necessarily have deep training with what to do afterwards.
I think it's also because the subtle body isn't included in a lot of traditions today, or in our time, where we go straight for the true nature of mind. And you can awaken the mind, of course, without ever experiencing the subtle body, but it is part of who we are.
It gets bypassed.
It gets
right?
bypassed. Yes. And I think we're missing something when we do that. And often teachers will say, and there's a truth in this and there's a wisdom to it, to ignore the bells and whistles of what the subtle energies bring, because we can get attached to them and they can lead us down a tricky path that may not be conducive to awakening. But it is, Kundalini itself is transformative, and if we can harness it, or the energies that are moving towards awakening it, then it's a very, very powerful tool for awakening to the multidimensionness of our beingness, and the aliveness, the full aliveness of who we can be in the world. I see sometimes this lack of aliveness, and I say this respectfully, when the subtle body teachings have been missed out of a practice. Again, comments.
I mean, I had a thought that there's a tendency to lump everything together into the Kundalini awakening, since this is a language that has become so popular in our culture. So any experience anyone has, psychic or otherwise, oh, you're having a Kundalini awakening. Right, and so there's so little specific. There's so little discernment in the way in which we talk about, at least in general kind of spiritual culture, or not talk about it at all. And so, and I think so few people have the actual precision with which they can have this discussion, the perception, which can really help discern whether this is actually a Kundalini experience or a Kundalini awakening, or not everything is a Kundalini awakening.
Well, I work with a lot of people, or I see a lot of people, and we hear about it, who go into these amazing kriyas and are making sounds, and the body's doing all kinds of crazy movements, and they say, it's Kundalini, I'm having a Kundalini, and it's really not. It's ecstatic energy that's disembodied. It might be in the body, but it's not integrated. And so we get, again, a little bit into trouble saying I'm having a Kundalini when really you're having this flow of energy that there's no capacity to really deeply integrate. And the joy and the bliss doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be Kundalini. Maybe it can be, maybe it's not. Sometimes the bliss and the joy that comes from a Kundalini as it enters into the central channel, also known as the Sushumna, is a very quiet and very still process of joy and bliss that you could be sitting there actually in this non-conceptual flow of primordial energy, and nobody may know unless you are resonating with them or see a little bit of a glow around them. But I really wanted to say that it doesn't have to be this big explosion and movements. It's more likely to be that if we haven't cleared out a lot of the blockages and tensions and traumas.
I look at it as a process, as you mentioned, and very often it begins with energy that you feel in your body. It may feel like a vibration rather than an explosion,
Right.
and it may be blissful, or it may feel like it gets stuck. It very often gets stuck in different chakra areas. And it will go on for months and months, and particularly wake you up in the middle of the night. You can have many different subtle phenomena with it. I feel you mentioned, what can you do? How do you support yourself with this? Sometimes you have to make lifestyle changes, and sometimes it actually, your body just feels terrible if you do something that's not quite right for you. And you have to become more authentic, more connected to your true nature. You have to be in right relationship with the energy. So if you contract and you're frightened and you think you shouldn't be having these experiences, it will be more difficult until you relax. And I always tell people, let yourself lay down on your bed, let your body shake it out if that's what it wants to do, and then it'll stop interrupting you at inconvenient times, usually. So you can create it, it's your own life force. You can create a relationship with it that is allowing it to do the work it's trying to do. And my personal feeling is that if you don't, Kundalini is the accompaniment to spiritual awakening. I have seen it activate before an awakening, and I've seen it often activate after an awakening. And that I think that it's the biophysical function through which embodiment becomes possible.
Wonderful.
One of the critical sort of stages of training, I know that with Bonnie's work, she's interested in equally emphasizing non-dual training with energetic training. And there's another panel going on right now about sudden paths versus gradual paths of enlightenment. And, I definitely believe in paying attention to the full spectrum of methods. And so if you've had, say a few years of training within Tibetan Buddhism with Dzogchen or Mahamudra training, emptiness training, that if Kundalini begins to happen, the mind is less prone to be thrown by the amazing phenomena that can come. There's been a training to, first not be thrown by the phenomena of the traffic outside your door, right? Or the phenomena of your neighbors arguing. There's the myth that it's the neighbors, right, that are disturbing me, right, as opposed to the nature of my own mind. And so having that, this particular base is very helpful.
Well, I think that the meditation practices prepare the body for its natural arising. The meditation itself is a clearing process, and it's expanding our capacity to be able to hold within the body greater and greater amounts of energy in its different forms.
It just comes to me to say, since this is a little bit my subject matter, that there's a reason, right? Like Kundalini, Shakti, Kali, that she comes bearing weapons, that she comes, cuts through illusion, that it's this terrifying kind of image, because sometimes it is terrifying.
It can be like that.
And, you know, overwhelming and completely, you know, tearing us apart, ripping us apart piece by piece. And it's not like in any way an integrated, loving, wonderful experience that you actually can hold. Maybe, I think that very often we are not prepared for it, and maybe can't prepare for it, or for life, or for reality, right, in some ways.
This is why I feel healing trauma is one of the greatest spiritual paths to awakening, because it is clearing out the tensions and the blockages in the body. I'm speaking to it that way, but a trauma does create a block, it does create a tension, and every trauma that we heal, we soften, we relax, we open, we dissolve resistance, and it's creating our body as a vehicle that says, welcome, you know. In some traditions it's said, or in the tradition, by the Indian traditions, that Kundalini means coiled, kunda, around the sacrum, which is this holy or sacred space, and its mouth is actually blocking the entrance to the central channel. And when we have relaxed enough, and when our other energies, our life force energy is flowing enough, then the mouth will release and allow that dormant primordial energy to begin to move. And that's when we can move into this profound sense of non-conceptuality within our own being, where we can hold both. We can be in the world while also being in this non-conceptual space, or spaceless space, where they're not so different. But it takes work, and it takes courage, and it takes perseverance to keep going with our traumas. And when we combine that with the spiritual path, with meditation, with breath work, with contemplation, then we are maybe moving on a gradual path a little more quickly.
What comes to mind to me now is the importance of grounding. And so many people view grounding as like something slightly outside of their spiritual practice or spiritual method, when the reality is it's completely one and the same. Grounding methods are a key component of spiritual practice, that sometimes going slower is actually going faster, right? I don't exactly necessarily mean what I'm saying right now, right? But in a certain sense, for many people, that can be true, right? In other words, what is not called for is yet some other spiritual amplification method, right? If I just clear this blockage in this way, right? Adding more, as opposed to, bringing it down to earth.
Grounding.
And using mindfulness while grounding, for example. And I don't know if it would be a good idea to talk about various ways of grounding.
Yeah, sure, I think that would be great.
Bonnie, do you want to?
Well, I feel like being out in nature is really primary. Laying on the earth, connecting anything that connects your physical form to the earth. Gardening, digging, walking in sand barefoot, laying down flat, leaning against a tree, baking bread, kneading bread, or working with finger paints, something where you actually connect physiologically with something that's very earthbound. Playing with animals, playing with 2-year-old children, just not letting yourself drift away into kind of a non-embodied state, but remembering your body and coming back home to it consistently. And when you meditate, if you tend to lose yourself completely, take time to sit in the chair, feel your body on the chair, feel your feet on the ground, look around the room, orient yourself. Those are all ways of just remembering that no matter how free your spirit is, it's housed in a physical form here, and it needs to be able to function in that form. So those are some of the things that people have found helpful in keeping themselves grounded.
Yeah. And I think the more grounded we are, the more energy we're able to contain. And then the more grounded and embodied we are, then we can sense into her, I'm going to call Kundalini her, we can sense into her. It's almost you sense her moving a little bit, right? Calling out as if she's sensing, is this a place where I can arise, I can move? You can sense her waking up. The more connected and in your body you are, the more relationship you're going to begin to create with her. You know, sometimes she like opens one eye and looks around a little bit, and if you grasp at her, she'll go back to sleep. If you just acknowledge there she is, she's part of all of this, and don't particularize too hard on her, then she may gently begin to come. Yeah.
And each person responds to a different mosaic of grounding.
Yeah.
So you may have a list of grounding techniques, but it's fairly individual what tends to work for people. So occasionally something that's typically grounding, occasionally for someone, like say sexuality, that's a big one for being either grounding or ungrounding, for example. So just a couple of additions, things like taking a brief cold shower, right? You know that in the morning, if you're in a warm shower and you turn that all the way to cold, you are very quickly in your body, right?
Yeah,
but
yeah.
for some other people, they may have a reaction where they have a flight from from doing that. So yeah, and also things like exercise. Cardiovascular exercise might be healthy for people, or plyometrics. Where your body is being somewhat in a healthy way for your joints jarred. So jumping. And so one of the things that I notice when I talk to people about if the grounding that I have talked to them about has been working, I ask them what degree have you implemented it? And often, they've taken sort of a stab at it, but not deeply entered into, some of the various things that Bonnie was talking about. So it's something to consider. Just because you've begun trying something, grounding's also a process, right? Just like Kundalini is. And so not to stop certain things that might work too soon.
Yeah. And to be honest, sometimes if somebody's having a big emergence of Kundalini, grounding is just not enough. It's go seek out help, go find somebody somewhere. And this is why we're beginning this conversation to talk about places where we can go and get help. I think all three of you offer that. I do in a trauma perspective or a spiritual perspective. So we can start to help people facilitate this energy, because it seems to be that there's more and more of it emerging all over in various ways. I hear stories of it, people having these emergences of it in a supermarket and ending up in strange postures on the supermarket floor. It's not necessarily particular where it's going to come up. And so we can normalize it, normalize something that's really quite extraordinary. In a way that's useful today. So what I thought we could do is maybe take some questions from the audience to see what's out there in this community, to see where we need to go today, but also to see where we go next in this conversation. Vera, you want to say?
I just had a thought before I move on, just that it's not, that I'm cautious of things speaking about Kundalini as separate from the rest of our spiritual lives as well. That it's not this one process, but it's so deeply woven with our kind of spiritual maturation and our, for me, with our devotional lives and how we experience our yearning for God and how we experience our, life processes, that we don't extricate it and separate it as this like separate thing, but that
it is part of the whole of our awakening.
Exactly.
And as Bonnie said, it often comes from this deep, deep longing. But I think there is a wisdom in also naming it as a specific manifestation to help us make sense of it right now, right, as it is emerging in the culture. Okay, so let's take a question. There's someone back there.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having this panel and bringing the information out about Kundalini. And as a Kundalini experiencer who was not expecting it, not in a spiritual practice at the time, one of my biggest surges of energy was not in the supermarket, but in Lowe's in the plumbing section. But many, many nights, many occurrences of psychic phenomena that bent space and time. I'm so happy that you're bringing this information not only just to the general public, to the Santa community, but also to therapists. I know Bonnie has a book coming out, but also, and I'm aware of the Spiritual Emergence Network as well, but I'm wondering, how can you help Kundalini experiencers talk to people who are non-dual about it? How can you help them? Maybe a brochure. You know, there are brochures to help people talk about cancer. There's brochures to help people talk about addiction. But how do you go tell someone that you've had this crazy energetic experience that keeps you up at night, that makes you feel like your body's lifting, and that you're having a psychic phenomena when the person may not believe in any of that? So that's just a question.
I'll say something simple. Sometimes it's best to not speak about something that is really, really difficult for people to understand because it's so far outside their sphere of existence that it can be interpreted as something other than a spiritual emergence. So I would always say be careful who you speak to about such things. Anybody else?
I will say I've tried in the new book that I'm going to have out in June to really bring together the non-dual perspectives and Kundalini perspectives, because that's what's happened in me over the last 30 years. And I've asked many awakened people if there was an energy component to their realization, and I've never had anyone say no. It's just that people don't talk about the energetic aspect of it, and yet, if once you've seen it clearly, you can see it in their stories. For some people, it's not such a dramatic and intense, horrible overwhelm, but and for others it is. But I really believe that, along with the yogic model, that there has to be an energetic component if there's going to be a complete awakening of consciousness. That it's a transformation of the way we're wired. And it may happen in a gentle way, it may happen in a very intense, dramatic way, depending mostly, I believe, on our history and our practices. But I agree that you need to be careful who you talk to about it. And as you wake up, you realize you don't really need other people to understand you. You just need one or two people that can support your process the way you are, which is true in life in general.
I'm very discriminative about who I speak to about it. It's not something that people talk about on the street.
Yeah. Other comments?
Well, it's true that as long as you do have a couple of people, it can be helpful. I have found that, for a lot of people, the whole family, or close friends do know what's going on if it's dramatic.
For sure.
And so, in that case, it's important to always keep the other person in mind. And that's really difficult to do if you're the one in crisis, right? But, where is it that person's coming from? And so how can you talk about Kundalini from as close to where they're at as possible? There are three major things that are very helpful when it comes to spiritual crisis, and this is to a degree when aspects of mental instability come in. One is having a framework, right? So if you're a materialist Westerner, there's often greater propensities for mental instability than if you come from cultures that have that, right? And then another one is a supportive environment. And the more support that you have, there's a correlation with outcome. And then the third is normalization, which was, brought up here, where within a subset of certain people, who are going through this, what you're going through, there's a very high likelihood is completely normal. Yeah, including things that are often pathologized. So. Yeah.
And I'd like to say, too, you can use language that doesn't use the word Kundalini. Most people will say, like most of us are aware that under a lot of stress, somebody might start shaking, like when you're in shock. Or if you do body work, you might shake just to release stuck places. So, you can use language that just says, gee, my body, I feel really wired tonight. Or you can say, that you have a physical discomfort somewhere, or you're overtired, you can't think straight. Those are things almost anybody can relate to. And it's important to find the language that's comfortable for the people that you live with so that they don't panic, because they don't know how to help you. And if they think they're trying to fix something about you and they don't understand what it is, they can get very upset. So just find a way, if you have to talk about it, of saying, I really need to be alone tonight. The other thing I want to say is, one way or another, make sure you get enough sleep. The main reason that I have seen that people end up looking psychotic is they go for 2 or 3 nights without sleeping.
Right.
And that will make any of us look psychotic. You don't need Kundalini for that. So I always say, if you go, I frequently go all night without sleeping, but if the second night you still can't sleep, take something for it. Do something that'll help you sleep. Because if you go too long, you're really going to look out of it to other people.
Yeah, thanks, Bonnie. Maybe we can have another question. And I'm going to say this while, go ahead because you have the mic. But let me just say one thing while it's on my mind about the trembling and shaking, because I think that's really important. That it can, when the energy is moving through you, it can create a tremendous amount of trembling and shaking. And some of that is trauma energy releasing, moving out of your body. So if any of you are experiencing it and you can relax into that and allow it to happen, it can be a healing process that's shifting traumatic energy without you having to do any deeper work around it. So it can be an incredibly healing force. It's not just going to bring trauma up to be processed or to be resolved. It can actually do it for you if you're able to relax and soften into that energy. And it can be a tremendous amount of shaking while you're having tremendous, especially if the energy is going through the central channel in its most inherent way, or I think that would be the way to say it, you can have incredible visions. When it enters into the lower chakras, you see the cosmos, or universes, or galaxies being created, and your body can be shaking madly, and the best thing is to be able to just soften and relax into it and enjoy it if you can. Okay, question. Thanks.
I don't think so.
Orange one. Oh yeah, I'm on. Yeah, so that you're describing the experience that I had, but it was at a family dinner, Easter family dinner. So my mom always thought it was a panic attack that I had, but the extreme, it was so extreme, and the amount of shaking, and what I realized, and I couldn't speak, so I couldn't describe what's happening because my thoughts couldn't form. They were so shattered. And when it first came on, I felt I was going psychotic. I thought I was actually going crazy. I was having a psychotic episode because I was feeling very paranoid, schizophrenic paranoia kind of thoughts coming through. And then all of a sudden this energy, and I couldn't, I went completely white and I couldn't move. And they just put me on the couch and I just started shaking. But what I realized was happening was that it was going through each chakra. And then it was clearing out the things that were happening in each chakra, but it was also not just my stuff, it was the family. So I was feeling all these family wounds that were present in the family system. And my uncle was there and my mother was there, and so I was in a family situation. But I always felt that it felt like it was coming from above. It didn't feel like it was coming from me.
Yeah.
And there was a point where I couldn't have a thought, and so I told it to back off a little bit so that I could actually help it move rather than be completely blasted by it. And it did back off a little bit, so it wasn't completely, like I actually thought I was having a psychotic episode because I couldn't think straight.
That's a great point. You can say, as you said, in any other words you like, back off.
Yes.
Slow down.
Just slow down.
Yeah, and sometimes
have some sense of
it
self.
will,
just
and sometimes it won't.
Right,
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
But
for sharing.
I didn't know that was actually Kundalini or not, because it felt like it was coming. I thought it was maybe coming from above, or it was Shakti or something coming
There
from
can
above.
be both an ascent and a descent of energy at the same time.
Right.
And the energy that descends tends to be very still. And that's what can hold us in stillness. And the energy that seems to be arising, ascending, it seems to be very wild and explosive in a positive way. I'm thinking of the galaxies exploding and so forth. So there's a holding of both of these polarities or dualities of movement and stillness that come together. And it's as if Kundalini rises up and touches into the stillness in the crown chakra or higher, and then will come down and rest in the heart.
It was like my burning on the top, like if someone was putting their hand on top of my head, and it was like, get it off.
Yeah.
It was just,
And then it can open, and this is what we open the heart mind. When she does that full movement, she goes up and then will come back down to reside in the heart. The heart mind will open, and then the cosmos is within.
It's more unusual to experience it coming in from the down rather than up.
The chakra movement was from down
there are
going
systems
up.
that support that. Aurobindo's yoga is designed to develop a process that invites energy to come down rather than up. His integral yoga that Aurobindo developed. So it's not out of the realm of the system. And in Christianity, the downward flow of energy is considered like a descent of grace. So it's part of some traditions and some systems.
And people can feel it starting from one of their big toes, for example, and that maybe the energy skips around, that there's a blockage somewhere in the central channel, and this can bring up aspects of confusion about what's going on because this doesn't fit a stereotypical pattern of Kundalini that they've read about.
Because of course many energies are moving within the body. We have from the traditions many thousands of channels of energy, and those begin to clear and move before the energy moves into the central channel. So we can be experiencing all kind of phenomena as the energies are beginning to move to prepare us, clearing the smaller channels or the lesser channels before she moves into the central channel. And the psychic phenomena are quite often the side effects of all of those other channels and the different layers and levels of the chakras clearing. And people get terrified of the fact that those might stay. Some people want them and covet them and enjoy them and use them, and it's wonderful. It's anything. It's neither this nor that. But they're not necessarily going to stay, thank goodness, because you really don't want to be walking around the world hearing and seeing everything that she can, clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience, all of that can come all at once, and it can be incredibly overwhelming, and it's in those periods where you may want to hibernate a little bit, and they will settle down as the energies are integrated, if you agree.
One of the most common concerns people have is heightened sensitivity.
Yeah.
So many people can no longer go into big box stores or be in crowds like this one, or be around other people who have activated energy.
Yeah.
It feels overwhelming. So sometimes you have to make at least temporary adjustments in your lifestyle. But most of the phenomena passes. So whatever is going on, you can trust that it will pass.
Yeah.
It's not about all these things being permanent conditions. They're really transformative processes, and
but it can show us the potential of the human brain mind, right?
Yes.
Very different.
Yeah.
But what our brain can be open to is extraordinary. Whether we've had it in the past or this is what we're moving towards and preparing ourselves for. The potentiality that we see if you have an experience like this is wow, it's mind-blowing. And you never really see the world the same again. But again, nobody ever need know that either. Yeah. Can we have another question? So this lady's hand first. Yes.
I just want to really appreciate that we're having this conversation, because I think it's really time that Kundalini gets taken out of the closet. Because like what Bonnie said, what Bonnie said is there's awakening is accompanied by an energetic component. So it's not necessarily traumatic. It can be, but it's also natural. And I think part of what we are experiencing is the repression of the culture and the churches that have told us that, energy is bad and it's evil and it's sexual and oh my God, all this stuff. And that like Vera was saying, it's a natural process that it has a life of its own, and we can trust it, and it will teach us, and it will take us there. And yes, it's wonderful to have techniques and tools and a community of support, and that's what I think is the most important, is that we need to normalize this and say, yes, this is part of our awakening, and we claim this, and it's our birthright, and it's natural. That turn-on is a function of awakening our brain into its full capacity, and it's not relegated to sex or something to be afraid of. And fear arises, and let's support each other in this process, but it's something that has to be embraced as part of our journey here.
I agree completely.
And this is one of the reasons that we're staying away maybe from speaking directly to the traditions, which I really honor and have such rich information, and I know you, Vera, especially have the richness of this information, is right. And I think we can go into a conversation like that another time, but initially to speak about it generally in our general culture without having it to be so associated with Kali, and I think it is very important because I think we need to honor that in some way, and it can teach us so much, or Chandri, as you were speaking about the other day, so powerful and so rich, but it is nice to keep it at a conversational level within our culture just now. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Vera?
Actually, I wanted to comment just on the aspect of the energetic aspect, that I hope that as we kind of mature as a spiritual culture, and I think that that's actually happening a lot. Even, I always say, 10 years ago, the main pop spiritual conversation was about The Secret. Okay? Today, it's like Brené Brown, that's on Oprah's book club. So I feel like we have significantly matured, even in the pop sense,
Yeah.
And I think part of a kind of maybe maturation of our culture might also be including more levels of reality in our non-duality, such as the psychodynamics and the energetics, right? The level of experience that maybe more, I hope that more language precision and discernment about these processes get included in our conversations.
Yeah. Do you have another question?
Test. Thanks for your wonderful talk. I enjoyed listening to your insights about Kundalini. I don't actually have a personal story to share, just because I'm still trying to make sense out of what Kundalini is. So, and I'm a yoga teacher. I did many other models of yoga, like vinyasa, and I started doing tantra. So I would like to ask you, what's the starting point for me to explore Kundalini? Like, I heard the concept and people share experiences, but I just don't still, I think it's not enough, and like, I can't make sense.
Did you hear? I couldn't hear the
Where
question.
do you start?
Yeah,
Where
can
do
you
you start
just
to
say the
understand
question?
it?
Kundalini.
What to explore? Where do you start to explore?
You mean if you want to awaken it?
Yeah, if I want to practice Kundalini, what's the starting point?
I usually tell people this might be quite different for you, but I tell people, don't go around seeking Kundalini. Seek realization, seek truth, meditate, because if what you're really wanting is to know whether there's a God or whether you are part of something bigger than your individual life, the important thing is the waking up. Mm-hmm. And that if your body and system wakes up, then the Kundalini will activate on its own and do what is necessary. It knows what to do. Right. But if you go out and you just try to activate Kundalini and you don't have that foundational spiritual longing and desire, you can get into a lot of difficulties with it. Right. It can become very erratic. It's going to strip so many things out of your life. Are you ready for that? That's the thing to know too, because it brings about the letting go of all the old ways you have of looking at life and your world and your sense of your own unique identity. And so many people who go out looking just to, activate this wonderful energy don't understand that, and they have a very hard time adjusting to the changes that it brings.
Yeah, and I would also say, always, what is your motivation for wanting to do this? I'm not asking you the question. This is something to ask yourself. What is my motivation for wanting to know Kundalini? And I don't think it's a relationship that you want to get something from.
Actually, I like your question, and I'll answer to that. What I'm looking for is exploration, like we're exploring life. So I explore psychedelics, yoga, tantra, everything. This is something I haven't yet looked into. So since you are experts, I would like to know what's the starting point. How to do I have to even differentiate Kundalini from pranayama, the breathing, or any other modules that we have today?
I would say do your practices, and if she comes, and invite her through grace.
I think yoga and qigong are both excellent ways to expand the energy flow in your body and learn how to harmonize it and balance it. And then if Kundalini opens, you're much better prepared for living with the expanded energy
I'm getting to
field.
understand now. It looks like activating your chakras, the energies, is what Kundalini all about, right? Yeah? The Kundalini is when you activate your energies and
Kundalini is about
your chakras.
Kundalini is about your life force helping you wake up, supporting your body so that you can you have a transformation into a different way of seeing the world, seeing your life.
Yeah,
it's a support for that, so that if there's an awakening, it can integrate into your body. You can live it, rather than just be kind of out there in samadhi all the time.
Thank you, Bonnie. There's a lady here who has a
actually,
go ahead,
yep.
yeah.
Did you want to address? So one of the things that comes up in answer to your question is, when I did research with people who were experiencing Kundalini, one of the major themes that came up for people is that Kundalini is about connection, right? Connecting you to your deepest self, connecting you to your others, connecting yourself to nature and the cosmos. And so one of the ways to start is often, Kundalini information is often considered among the most esoteric components of mystical instruction, but the most exoteric or outwardly basic instructions are often the most potent. In other words, have you ever gone an entire day where you concentrated on, number one, am I aware that I'm aware? And am I loving every person that I meet as much as whoever my most cherished person is in my close sphere, right? And then another important factor that's little talked about is the role of dreaming in the Kundalini process. And so one of the things that you can do is, I don't know what your dreaming practice is, but whatever it is, there's probably a way to slowly and gently enhance that, and to bring about some intention not to awaken Kundalini vis-a-vis dreaming, but about, say, posing questions to whatever you consider your innermost source. What is it that I most need to heal now, or realize now, or let go of now, that can lead to this greater process that's possible.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Ted. Thank you. Yeah, dreams she will show herself in dreams. One last question. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for talking about this. So I had an experience by going to a retreat that focused on forgiveness work and compassion, and it starts with a feeling, and where do you feel that feeling in your body? And so I felt it in my hands, and it was pressure, and it started shaking. It just ripped through me like lightning, and I was on the floor shaking, and the whole thing of the light and the wah, 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 and the bliss. But then afterwards, it was like opening a can of worms, very sensitive. So all of this that you're talking about, it's like, oh my God, yes, I didn't know where to go. And truth be told, I probably still should go somewhere, seek some help somewhere, because I still get these aftershocks almost, especially being in places like this, the shocks. So my question is, the shocks, those aftershocks, the little convulsions, what is that? And what could I be doing with that? So, Is that clear?
I would say deepen your meditation practice. Take care of your body. Avoid alcohol. Usually that's necessary, not for everybody, most people. Listen to your intuition about what you need. Think of it as a relationship with the goddess. That it's not, we know the yogic model is usually like a snake because of the way it'll move through the body. It's easier to think of it as a goddess that you're going to have a relationship with. And I prefer Kundalini as Shakti, the goddess, rather than Kali, who's a little rougher to live with. And just trust it. Trust that you're in a process that is wanting you to become more and more awake. And so get into relationship with that, support it. Don't try to stop it or block it, but listen to it and do what it seems to want you to do.
So it's a relationship of respect as opposed to what can I get out of this for me. Right, yeah. Thank you so much for coming. Vera, did you have one more thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you, and I'm in my own process, and I'm part of that. And I would say really, just in general, and prayer really helps me. Prayer. Yeah.
Thank you all for coming and
thank you.
Sharing such a short time.
Can we say a few words about resources?
Yes, absolutely.
I'd like you to, and I have a website called KundaliniGuide.com that has a lot of basic information, and a couple of books on Amazon that are basic guidebooks. And I know there's a network that you can talk about.
Yeah, the Spiritual Emergence Network. So if you put that into Google, also for those of you who have flown in from abroad, there's also the International Spiritual Emergence Network. So we're in something like, to varying degrees, over a dozen countries with a number of other people in other countries setting up centers. And then if you're interested in the role of dreaming, and getting in touch with intuition, right? That can be a key part of why a spiritual teacher is important, is that they're bringing in their intuition. Then there's my website at tedesser.com. Yeah.
Great. And does the network now have available a lot of names of people in their areas that they can call if they want to speak with a therapist?
That's right.
Familiar?
Oh, okay. Yes, I didn't go at length, but that's about receiving support from either spiritual counselors or spiritually trained psychologists, psychiatrists, and potentially short-term conversations if you don't have money, or peer support groups, because often people who are going through this income, avenues of income have been disturbed.
Exactly.
So
yeah. All right, and thank all of you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.